So my experience of getting to know Frankie, initially, I'd say I actually struggled. So she was born with a planned C-section at 35 weeks. And I was able to hold her for about 10, 15 seconds max, before she was taken off because her nostrils were flaring, and they could tell that she was having some sort of respiratory distress. I had lost a lot of blood. I'd lost about, I think, getting on for 2.5 to 3 liters of blood, and wasn't feeling very well. And they whisked her off to Skaboo at the Royal Surrey, and my husband went with her. But by the time I was sort of feeling ready to see her, I obviously couldn't get down to Skaboo because I'd had a C-section, so I wasn't able to walk. And by the time I did, I think it was about 11 o'clock at night. And I went down and I was exhausted, in a wheelchair, in quite a lot of pain. And she was clearly quite unwell. And I just had this very strange feeling that she was really unwell. And unlike my previous children, I didn't want to touch her. I didn't want to, my husband kept sort of putting his hand through an incubator, and I just didn't want to. And I only stayed actually a few minutes, and I went back to the ward, and my husband went home. And then I woke up in the middle of the night, and I made the midwives call Skaboo, and it turned out that she'd gone up to 100% oxygen requirement, and she was clearly deteriorating. And so I found it really hard. And the next day she was whisked off to St. Peter's with a pneumothorax, with a punctured lung. And I actually couldn't look at her. I found it really hard. I think I was probably in my head I wouldn't say I was being over dramatic, but I was probably thinking the worst and preparing myself for potentially the worst, even though no one said to me it was going to happen. I think I felt like I couldn't get close to her because I was so scared that she was going to die. And I found it really hard. And then she was taken to St. Peter's. We weren't allowed to travel with her in the ambulance because of COVID. So we followed her down the motorway. And then I walked in, and I panicked. The lights, the noises, I'd never been in a NICU environment before. All the doctors were talking to me, trying to tell me what was going on. And I just had to walk out, and I went home that night, and I gave my other 2 children a big cuddle, and I felt very removed from her, and I was very worried I was never going to form that bond. And then, so yeah, it was very tricky. It was very hard those first couple of days. I found it really difficult. I think there were 3 things for me. The first one was the most incredible consultant, who I will never forget her face, said to me and my husband, on the first morning, so the morning after she'd been taken, so we went home, and when I came back the next morning, and this consultant said to us, Frankie's here for a particular reason. She's not here with an unknown life-threatening diagnosed problem. We know what the problem is, and we can help fix it. And that immediately took the pressure off. Someone saying to me that actually it was going to be okay, because up till then no one had been able to. So I immediately was able to breathe a sigh of relief that a doctor had kind of come off the fence and actually been able to say to me, it's going to be okay. It's probably going to be okay. 2, skin to skin. The first time I was able to actually hold her skin to skin was amazing. She had a chest drain in, which made it very difficult. I think anyone that's held premature babies, it is complicated. It takes about half an hour, 40 minutes to get her on me. And then she's on me, and she was desaturating a bit. But then as soon as she settled on me, and I had an hour of her on me, and it was just absolutely amazing. And then the final thing was when she was well enough for me to feed, and she fed like an angel. I breastfed her. And all the emotion just came out. I think I hardly cried up until that point. I think by now, this must have been about day 7, day 8. And there was no one in the whole NICU. I'd gone in the ER on a Sunday evening, they'd allowed me in. And I just put her on my boob, and she just latched. Like none of the others latched that well. She just latched. And oh my God, it was like the most incredible experience. And I just remember just sobbing. My husband wasn't allowed in because of COVID. So it was just me and all the nurses were crowding around because obviously it's quite rare to see a baby in NICU breastfeeding like that, especially a baby that had been so sick even just a couple of days before. And actually from that moment, I'd say that that was a massive turning point for me. I knew she's going to be all right. Okay, I think the most important thing is not to put pressure on yourself. I think that a lot of mums expect this kind of come to Jesus moment that their baby's born into the world and suddenly, instantly, that's it. And there's just this incredible bond. And I think some people it is like that, but for lots of people it's not, and that's okay. Even with my healthy babies, I think I've sometimes, well, particularly with Lara, my first, I think it definitely took me a few days, a few weeks to kind of really build that bond. So I'd say the most important thing is not to put any pressure on yourself. It will come, and don't feel like you're a bad mum or guilty if it isn't instantaneous, because they are kind of strangers. You are kind of strangers, even though you've carried them around for 10 months, you don't know them. And they're demanding strangers, and it's really hard, really, really hard. Even when everything goes well, it's really hard. So I think the most important thing is not to put pressure on yourself and to do it at your own pace, and yeah, and not to feel guilty if it's not perfect. I'm terrible. So I really struggled with my previous children to make it work. Frankie and I by far had the best breastfeeding journey, which is ironic given that she was the sickest by a long way. Um, what I loved about it, it was an opportunity to do something normal, to actually do something that you do with any baby. And I really cherished that. And just to be able to hold her and breastfeed, it felt like I did in a SCBU. It felt like I could be anywhere at home on my sofa. And that was amazing, because I think when you have a premature baby, the baby's very medicalized, and it's not, it doesn't often doesn't even feel like it's your baby a lot of the time, because the decisions are being made by somebody else. And there's a lot of tubes and equipment around, and you're nervous. So to be able to breastfeed and do something so normal, I found incredibly normalizing, and it really helped me see her as a baby and not as a patient. Before I had the baby, was being shown around, and it's something I'd really, really advise anyone that is in a situation where they may end up or have a lot more higher likelihood of ending up in a SCBU or NICU, is being shown around, because the first time you go in and your baby's in there, there's so much emotion. When you go in there and it's not your baby, it's still quite emotional. I cried when I first looked around it, but you get to see the setup, you get to see other babies in incubators, you know what it looks like, because for most of us, it's a world that, you hope you never have to see. But it is quite a scary world. It's an amazing world, but it is quite a scary world. So I think that if I would really, that for me was so helpful. I think if I hadn't had looked around it before, and the first time I went in there, it was my baby, in an incubator on oxygen, I think I would have found it even harder. So just knowing what you're going into, I found really helped. And stuff, the staff are just exceptional, absolutely exceptional. One thing I found incredibly helpful was when you're not there, and obviously with COVID, but even out of COVID, but you still have to go home at night, or you do go home at night. You've got, I don't think you should stay every night. I know now you can, and lots of them, they've got very amazing sort of set up beds that can go up next to them, but I think it is important to go home a bit and get some sleep and get away. But being able to call at any point, and get an update on your baby, whether it's 1 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning, I found that incredibly comforting. When I was going, we always used to call before we went to sleep, and then straight away in the morning when we woke up. And I think that what I found incredibly helpful was mostly the nurses. Truth be told, the nurses were, the Dr. Rams are not always the easiest to understand, particularly in SCBU. But I found that the nurses were fantastic, and if you can ask them any questions that you need to ask them. So for me, I the two places that I looked for help, one was obviously right in front of me. It was the nurses and the support staff, the support, the support workers, I can't remember what they were called, but they wore grey at the Royal Surrey. They had slightly more time than maybe some of the nurses did. And they were fantastic about showing you, where the information was. Often in the kitchen, there was a lot of stuff on the wall, a lot of pamphlets, a lot of leaflets. Anything down to the fact you can get 35% off or 30% off a breast pump, by using the right code. That was really helpful. But also I found friends actually. So I had a very good friend who had a premature baby, and she was probably the most useful person that I spoke to, because she'd been there and she had the time, and I probably spoke more to her in those few weeks than I did to anybody else in the world, apart from my husband. And just having that WhatsApp support when you're in there, or when things don't go well. I think it's such a journey. Having a premature baby is a real journey, and some people's journeys are short and some people's journeys are long. But either way, it's a journey. Getting out of those doors and taking your baby home, for everybody's a journey. And I think that journey often has ups and downs. And having someone that's been there before to tell you that just because you've had a bad day or baby's had a bad day doesn't mean that, that's it. You will have good. It is 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But hearing that from somebody that's been there, and even just understanding all the medical jargon, what is Optiflow? What does it mean when they're turning it up and turning it down, and the jaundice test. Just having someone to explain on the medical side, because I do think the doctors are very busy, the nurses are very busy. I actually found having a buddy, almost a buddy system, I think, and I know they do that at St. Peter's. And actually, I do know I've got friends that say it's incredibly helpful. Gosh, it's so hard. If anybody that's done it, my heart bleeds from anyone that gets in that lift with their baby still inside the hospital. It is, it's the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I just used to cry all the way home. So the 3 things that helped me, Mo, I think number 1, going home at night when you need to, not spending your whole time there. It's very easy to get tied to the incubator or the cot, and actually it's too much, particularly now they have these brilliant beds, chairs that fold down into beds, and it is fantastic. Having that option to stay is amazing. But I got sent home regularly by the nurses, because I was so tired. You don't get very good quality sleep when you're there, because of all the beeping, and you're often trying to pump, or someone might be trying to pump as well. So the combination of waking up to pump, being woken up by desaturation beeping, baby feeding, baby needing nappy changes, actually going home and leaving and going home for a night, as hard and as awful as it is to leave them, you end up being stronger in the morning. I really believe that. So I think that is my number 1 advice, is just you have to leave. As hard as it is, you have to tear yourself away from that bed. And if you're there for a long time, I think it's the same in the day, spending all day, every day there, if you're there for months, is too much. You can't do it. So number 1, you need to have your own time, look after yourself, self-care. Number 2, I found talking really helped me. So like I said previously, I talked a lot. I had an amazing lady who actually was a midwife, who had helped me with some stuff with my previous children, and then a very good friend of mine that had a premi about a year before. And I spoke to them a lot. I'd often call one on the way into the hospital in the morning, and then I'd be on WhatsApp throughout the day. But having that support from someone that's been there, or someone that understands it, to help you. Your brain is so foggy, you've just had a baby, you're tired, you're recovering, and you're and you're going through probably one of the most emotional times of your life, and you're having jargon thrown at you left, right, and centre by doctors, and often you don't have a chance to actually understand exactly what's being said. And there's so much to a premi. Often decisions are made, and you don't always understand why those decisions have been made. So having somebody that you can talk those through, I found absolutely the most important thing. And is there a number 3 for me? Is there a number 3? I don't know. I think for me it was probably, I think number 3 is accepting it's really difficult. I think, there's not much, you feel very helpless when your baby's in SCBU or NICU, but apart from being able to pump milk, it's about all it's how I felt like that was about all I could offer. The baby was being looked after, the decisions were being made by somebody else. And at times they almost don't feel like they're your baby. And I remember thinking a few times, if I wanted to leave now and take my baby home, I would be stopped. Someone would actually stop me. Just accepting that is what it is, but it's not going to be like that forever, which at the time doesn't feel like, it doesn't feel like that, but it is true. You will get to take your baby home, and just accepting that's how it is for now. And there's nothing you can do, as awful as it is. That for me helped. I think everybody's so different, Mo, in terms of how they respond to these situations. So I wouldn't want to speak for all women, but I know the type of woman that I am. I quite like to understand what's going on. I quite like to get my head around the medicine side and medical side, the decisions that are being made, why they're giving them certain drugs, why they're having certain x-rays and so on. And for me, I would say for anyone else that's like that and really wants to understand, is don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid about being a pain. It can sometimes feel like everybody is incredibly busy, which they are, but also this is one of the hardest times as a mum that you're going to have. And therefore, you are in your rights to push and to ask questions and to understand exactly why certain decisions are being made and to understand the journey. I think you, once you have a premature baby, that journey to getting out the doors, there are certain sort of gates you have to kind of jump through, or hoops you have to get through. Baby has to be gaining weight, baby has to be feeding, baby has to be able to hold temperature. And actually, I think that can sometimes feel like a really difficult, cloudy, you don't really understand it until you go through. You think you're getting somewhere, and then they suddenly add another hoop for you to go through. And one thing that I found really helpful the second time round for me is knowing what was ahead of us. And actually, the first time round, I wish I'd been more specific with the doctors and the nurses to say, what do we have to be doing to get out of here? What is the process for discharge? Because obviously you don't want to take your baby home early, but everyone in there wants to get their baby home as soon as possible. And understanding from the, maybe not quite from the outset, but once things are more stable, knowing what the requirements are for discharge and asking those questions, I think you're totally in your rights to. Particularly if it's your first time. I found it really helpful knowing the second time round, and I wish that I'd asked more in the first time what we needed to do and what needed to happen to be able to get them in that car seat.